We want to tell you what we know as we know it. But we just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City. One report said, and we can't confirm any of this, that a plane may have hit one of the two towers of the World Trade Center. But again, you're seeing the live pictures here. We have no further details than that. We don't know anything about what they have concluded happened there this morning, but we're going to find out and, of course, make sure that everybody knows on the air.
These are, of course, the two twin Trade Center buildings that are down at the foot of Manhattan, that they really are the beacons of New York. It was there that there was the explosion a couple of years ago, brought about by terrorists. That's all gone through the courts, but this we don't know anything about. We don't know about anything that has happened here other than the fact that there's obviously been a major incident there, and we're going to go to a special report now from ABC News.
This is an ABC News special report.
Now, by the entire ABC network, Good Morning America was in progress in the East Coast and the Midwest, but we're joined by the entire network just to show you some pictures at the foot of New York City. This is at the World Trade Center. Obviously, a major fire there, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report, as of yet unconfirmed, that a plane has hit of the World Trade Center, and you can see that there is smoke there coming out of at least two sides of the building.
And as you said, there are two towers, the tallest structures in Manhattan, on the island of Manhattan. We're trying to get people on the telephone to see what more we can learn. We have no idea if it was a plane. Was it in any sense deliberate? Was it an accident? It does seem to be that there is considerable and truly terrifying damage on some of those floors at the top.
This angle is a little deceptive. As you know, there are two Trade Center towers, and the second tower there is hidden behind the first. This is really almost the picture postcard of New York City. It's that and the Empire State Building, I guess, are the two most recognizable symbols of New York. There you can see the two, well, we had there for just briefly the other angle of the World Trade Center towers, but this is confined to one of the towers on the upper floors. These buildings, I think they're 110 stories each, so this would be in the top 15 or 20 floors there.
You mentioned earlier that, of course, as we all know, years ago there was that terrorist attack. It took place down on the ground and in the underground levels and the garage levels. But again, that's not to imply that we have any reason at this point to believe that this is terrorism or not. We simply don't know. And in just a few minutes, Peter Jennings is going to be joining us from the news desk uptown, where he's going to tell us everything that he knows. We also have Don Dahler on the phone, and you know he's been with us on Good Morning America for a long time. And Don, where are you, and what do you know?
I'm about 4 or 5 blocks just north of the World Trade Center, and at about 10 minutes ago, 15 minutes ago, there was a loud sound that I can only describe as it sounded like a missile, not an airplane. Then there was a loud explosion, and immediately lots of screaming out on the streets. And I don't want to cause any speculation, but that's the only way I could describe the sound, and it was definitely not the sound of a prop plane or anything like that. And
am I right? Are you a pilot?
Well, I have flown. I do not have a pilot's license. But I grew up on military bases, and I know the sound of jets, and I've been in war zones and heard those kinds of different sounds. So, again, not to cause any kind of undue speculation, but the sound itself was not of a prop plane. It was perhaps a jet, but it could have been a missile as well.
Can you give me, was it a whining sound, Don, or what?
Yes, it was a how to describe it? It was a high-pitched, but it had a whooshing sound, not like a prop plane.
Huh. And you didn't see anything actually in the air?
No, I wasn't looking out, but we looked out immediately. You can see quite a lot of damage. If it was an airplane, it had to be huge because it hit way up in the World Trade Center. I would say it's probably a good 5/6 of the way up to the top. There's a considerable amount of flame. There's damage on two sides that I can see. On the very north-facing side, there's where looks like is the largest amount of damage. there's a gigantic hole that encompasses a number of floors. I would say maybe 10 to 15 floors. And then on the left side, which would be the east side, there's considerable damage as well, and lots of flames and smoke coming out of it.
You know, I don't know that people outside New York realize it, but these two buildings are essentially cities in and of themselves. I mean, there's 30 to 40,000 people, if I remember the number, and I'm doing this from memory.
Yes.
Number of people who actually work in these buildings, and this obviously occurred at the time that people were coming to work.
Don, are you saying that this sound was striking enough that you heard it before you
Absolutely.
saw it?
I noticed it before the explosion. I noticed a sound like something was very low and shrieking across the sky. And then I heard the explosion.
And which of the two towers is this? Because, again, we're just seeing an angle that's a little deceptive.
This is the West Tower.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're hearing somewhat faintly in the background, Don, as you talk to us, sirens. Are there a lot of emergency vehicles already on the scene?
Yeah, they're descending. This part of New York City has quite a few emergency stations all over, and I imagine it sounds like they're coming from every one of the stations. In fact, there's one just down the street that sounds like every truck they have is headed that way.
We see, actually, we see two faces. I know you can't see the picture that our audience is seeing, but we see two faces of that tower. One seems to have a rather gaping large hole in it. The other face seems to have two holes in it. It's all somewhat obscured by smoke, one large, one somewhat smaller.
Right.
And, of course, we know there are a variety of offices there. There are financial offices there. There are advertising offices, all kinds. We can only hope that since it is still a little bit early in New York, that maybe on some of those floors, some of the offices were still not open for business.
You can now see there on that one side, well, you can see flames now coming actually out of two sides of the building, and I'm minimizing actually the number of openings that are on those two faces of the World Trade Center. There's multiple, it looks like, holes
with fire
or
still
openings
going on.
On both sides of the tower.
As we've heard before, we said earlier that there was at least one speculative report that an airplane had crashed in, whether deliberately or accidentally, we don't know. And there are continuing reports from people who say that they saw an airplane, one woman saying that she saw a jet going in. So, again, Don, a jet screaming that low could be consistent with what you heard?
Absolutely. It could be consistent with what I heard. What I know I did not hear was an airplane, any kind of a prop plane. And I think looking at the damage, I don't think there's any way possible that it would have been a prop plane. It's just too much damage to the building. What's deceptive about the World Trade Center is that it is so huge and so tall that the perspective is difficult to get from the ground. But when you look at the size of the hole, and if you look in context at one of the helicopters going around at a lower size, a helicopter is about the size of a regular Cessna, that kind of thing, the body of the plane. The hole is so much larger than that helicopter that it would have to, if it was a jet, I would have to speculate that it would have to be a larger than normal jet. I mean, larger than like a Citation or something like that. It's just such a gigantic hole, and it blew out the other side. And again, these buildings are almost a city block size building. So for it to have blown in this hole on the north side as well as the west side, it had to be a gigantic explosion.
Well, obviously we don't know if this was if it was a plane, and I underline if it was. We don't know if it would have been deliberate or accidental. We know so little now other than what we can see from these pictures. But the interesting point is there are a number of small airports around New York where passenger corporate jets or private jets will land and take off. And it's not uncommon, if you have ever visited the World Trade Center, when you go up to the observation platforms at the top, you can look down on airplanes that are either coming in for landings or taking off from New York airports. But all pilots who fly in this area know very well where the World Trade Center is located. All the routes are very far or comfortably far away from the two towers.
And not just private planes, too, because with some winds in some directions, even out of the big commercial airports, planes are routed quite close to New York. I've flown in from LaGuardia, even into LaGuardia, but having to go right by the World Trade Centers.
But we emphasize this is all speculative at this point. And just to reset for all of you, this is a special report from ABC News, and we are dealing, and we have to underline this, we are dealing purely in the realm of speculation here as to what may have happened at the World Trade Center. Obviously, a major incident occurred here on the upper floors of one of the World Trade Center towers. You can see multiple openings and flames coming out of at least two sides of the tower at the World Trade Center. And
we just got a report that the Associated Press is now reporting that it was an aircraft. So that's one more witness weighing in, or at least one more source weighing in on the fact that it was an aircraft of some kind.
And as Don Dahler reported, this occurred about 15 or 20 minutes ago in downtown New York. And New York time, that would have been about 20 minutes or 8:45. This is a time when literally tens of thousands of people are coming to work at the World Trade Center.
Looking at the top of the building, you mentioned there's an observation center, and I don't know what time it opens, but I think it opens fairly early, and people are up there at all hours of the day. Families, tourists coming in to look at the city of New York from atop it. Also there, I don't know if this is the building that has the restaurant on top of it as well, but in those high floors, there are places where tourists team in the morning, even if the regular workers weren't in. And we remind you again that there was a terrorist bomb that did go off at the World Trade Center years ago. It was down in the garage level, but we have no
Obviously,
reason,
no
as we say
indication
over
that
and
this
over
could have
again,
been related to
speculate
that.
in that way.
Right.
Now,
Don Dahler, ABC's Don Dahler, who is on the scene. Don, just give me some description again of what you can see now.
What we're seeing, it appears that there is more and more fire and smoke enveloping the very top of the building. And as fire crews are descending on this area, it does not appear that there's any kind of an effort up there yet. Now remember, oh my God.
oh my God.
That looks like a second plane.
Dear
Has
Lord.
I
just
did not
hit.
see a plane go in. That just exploded.
We just saw another plane coming in from the side.
You did. That was out of
Yes, and
my
that's
view.
the second explosion. You could see the plane come in just from the right-hand side of the screen. So this looks like it is some sort of a concerted effort to attack the World Trade Center that is underway in downtown New York.
We will see that scene again just to make sure we saw what we thought.
We're going to give you a replay of what we just saw, and I must admit I thought it was some sort of fire equipment coming in or some sort of observation plane, but it was obviously designed to attack the World Trade Center. We're going to show you that. Here's a replay of the videotape. In a second, that looks like a good-sized plane came in and hit the World Trade Center from the other side. So this is obviously, or would seem to be, and again, I'm dealing in speculation, but it would seem like there is a concerted attack against one of the towers of the World Trade Center underway.
We had seen a plane coming in from the other direction earlier. I'd noticed it. Had you, Charlie? I didn't know if it was that plane that then circled wide and came back from another direction, but we all watched it. And I just assumed.
Don, could you hear that? Could you hear that plane as it came in?
I did not hear that plane, but I had to step inside the window because the fire crews were so loud, the sirens, that I couldn't hear you.
I got you.
I did see the explosion, but the side of the building that the plane entered was just outside of my view. So all I saw was this huge fireball and the explosion.
Well, the shot that we've got is now just from one side of the World Trade Center. But this is the shot again. This is moments ago of this second plane coming in, and this is now in slow motion. Oh, this is terrifying, awful.
To watch powerless is a horror.
They waited for the coverage. They waited for the coverage.
All right, we're going to go back to live coverage. Now you're looking at live pictures, and there is the second fire, which was brought about by this second plane that hit the tower. And Don, from everything I can see, it was the same tower that was hit the first time, right?
No, it's the second tower.
It's the other tower.
It is the other tower that was hit.
My mistake.
They targeted it, from what I'm seeing on the television, from your view, the two towers are in, one is in front of the other one, but it was definitely the second tower that was hit about halfway down, not quite as high. And from my view here, it does not seem to be as big, as much damage as the original. I don't know if that means it was not as big a plane or what. I did not see the plane go in, but it's horrendous damage. But it doesn't seem to be the gaping hole through two sides of the building like on the first one.
Don, from your vantage point, can you see if there are people coming out down below?
I can't see the bottom of the base of the buildings.
There's the wider shot of the two towers. Now, both towers have been hit by planes now in the last half hour. And again, I say we are totally powerless in knowing what's going on here, except that it would obviously appear, it can't be a coincidence like this. It would obviously be some sort of a concerted attack against both towers of the World Trade Center. This is again, we're going to show for the third time this tape of the airplane flying in and hitting the World Trade Center. This is slow motion of the plane coming in and hitting the obscured second tower of the World Trade Center. And you can see flame coming out, and I can't see the plane coming down. You know, if it just
Charlie, that's a commercial-sized jet. That did not look like.
No, that's a good-sized airplane. Yes.
Yeah, that's not a little commuter plane. That was a good-sized jet.
And I can't tell if it actually flew into the building or if it just clipped it with a wing. And if it did, of course, then there's the frightening prospect that the plane would have crashed right in the streets of very busy streets of New York.
Yeah.
It seems, and this is a small hope, that the fire may have gone out from the first site. I don't know if we can get the camera in close or not. It doesn't mean that the smoke isn't still terrifying and deadly.
Diane, I can see from here the orange flames. The fire has not gone out. In fact, it looks as if it's encompassing a part of the building that was not initially part of the original explosion. I can see it moving over to the left side, which would be the east side of the first building, almost all the way over to the edge. The back side is totally enveloped in flames that I can see from here.
Yes, with that kind of smoke, there's got to be an awful lot of flame in there. And I think all of us have thought at one point or another about the fact that these buildings, though they are so majestic as they stand above the skyline of New York, that it's very difficult for emergency workers or firefighters to fight these. We have a witness who was called in to speak to us. His name is Karim Haroki. Mr. Haroki, did you, as I understand, they're telling me in my ear, is it true that you witnessed the first plane hit the tower?
Yeah.
Could you give me some sort of a description of it?
I was sitting in my car here in Greenwich, you know. I just saw the plane is coming down from the left side and going straight to the building, you know, and going inside.
It actually went inside the building?
Excuse me?
It flew right into the building?
I saw it coming from the left, and I saw the plane coming through to the building. I go inside. It's a small plane.
You say small plane. Was it a jet?
Excuse me?
Was it a jet plane?
No, it was plane, you know, like they teach the people for the plane is like small plane, you know. It's that kind of plane.
You mean like a small single or double engine
yeah,
prop
double
plane?
engine, yeah.
Right, and it actually went into the building there on the upper floors?
Yeah, going into the building. And I never saw that plane before. It's like something, I don't know, it's like they work with the motor. I never saw a plane like that before. Yeah.
All right,
Mr. My car, she's nice.
Mr. Haroki, you are down in that area right now then?
Yeah, I'm in Greenwich here on North Mall Street.
Can you tell if there's a large number of fire equipment and emergency equipment on the scene?
Excuse me?
Can you see fire equipment or emergency equipment on the scene?
I don't know. The fire is upstairs in the building, and the second plane is the other building too.
And did you see the second plane come in?
Yeah, I saw the second plane is going boom. I heard it, you know. I just wake up my head like that. I saw it inside too.
And that second plane much larger than the first?
Same. The same. Both same.
They're both the same?
Yeah.
Because the pictures we see, the second plane looks rather large.
No, it's not like, it's going inside too. It's going inside of the building too. And the second hole, it's smaller than the other one.
And it actually also penetrated the building. You could see it go in.
Yeah, it's inside. It's inside. It's inside. No plane is outside. Nothing.
Now, can you see if there are people fleeing the building? We don't have shots yet from street level. Can you see if there are people leaving the building?
No, I can't see because I told you on the North Mall and Greenwich, I just saw up the building. I can't see downstairs.
So you're in Greenwich Village?
Yeah, no, in Greenwich Street and North Mall.
Oh, I see, on Greenwich Street. Okay, yeah. I can. That's just to locate people who don't know New York, that is right in the vicinity, right nearby, but not actually on the site of the World Trade Centers. ABC's Peter Jennings is at the anchor desk uptown here in New York and is now in position. Peter, I suspect you are looking at exactly the same pictures. Well, I know you're looking at the same pictures we are.
We are, Charlie. We've been watching it from the beginning, and we'll be watching this for much of the day. There is chaos in New York at the moment. There have been not one but two incidents, as Charlie and Diane have so ably reported so far. The second one coming at 9:03, when television was on live, and you could see what was clearly a jet aircraft flying into the second trade tower. Both trade towers now, these 110-story high towers, have now been hit. There is chaos here, or there's chaos in the immediate area. There is confusion in Washington, because now everybody is engaged in this. The Pentagon is involved in this. All the intelligence services are engaged at this in the morning. And as we look at those towers, let's just simply keep looking at these towers this morning. And if you have the feed at home, I actually don't have it here, so somebody could please make sure that I have the photo picture of what's going on. The various airports in the area, Newark and LaGuardia particularly, have already suspended operations. The city asked the Federal Aviation Administration for permission to close down airspace in all of New York, lest there be a third aircraft or some other untoward incident involved. And ABC's John Miller is with me here, who's been listening efficiently to all of his police sources. And John, I gather the city is ordering a major evacuation from a number of public buildings and a number of these very high-profile targets.
They're going into what they call an Archangel operation, which is a code name for essentially a major lockdown of the city, evacuating the United Nations building, the municipal building, City Hall, Gracie Mansion, which is the mayor's residence, all things that could be considered potential targets, because obviously, because of the nature of this with two incidents, there is the potential that this is a double act of terrorism, and they are worried about other targets.
All right, let's go back to the building itself. John, you work the police radio, if you would, for just a minute. The FBI is already investigating reports that a plane was actually hijacked before this collision, this incident, this attack occurred at the World Trade Towers. In Washington at the moment, the presumption is that this is a terrorist attack, according to ABC's John McWethy, though it's very difficult at the moment for anybody to get a clear appreciation of what has actually happened, because it has happened so quickly. First attack coming just before 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and the second attack, which we could all watch, those of us who are watching television, occurring at 9:03, just 3 minutes after. The president is in Florida, and he has already been told of what is happening. These trade towers have always been, and you may have heard it already this morning, regarded as a prime target for this particular act of terrorism. As you know, there was terrorism at the World Trade Center before 1993. There was a huge bombing attack on the trade centers. These are the two at the southwestern corner of the island of Manhattan, just prime pieces of real estate of interest to anyone who wishes to hit either New York City or the United States in a very, very visible and vulnerable way. We have with us at the moment Lindsey Grimm, a witness who was in the building on the phone. Lindsey, can you hear me?
I hear you.
Can you tell me what you know?
Well, I actually, just to clear things up, I wasn't in the building. I was in the World Financial Center, which is directly behind it.
Okay.
And our part of the building faces the section, the courtyard where the World Trade Center is. So we ran to the window right after we felt this kind of this sonic boom as if it were an earthquake, and something just wasn't right. We ran to the window and somebody yelled, "Oh my God, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center."
Is this what we think of as the first one or the second one, Lindsey?
It was the first one, because I was actually outside for the second one.
And the first one appears to have gone into the southern tower, am I correct?
Correct.
And this second one, did you see the second one?
I had my back facing. I was running as fast as not running, but walking at a brisk pace away from the two buildings when I heard it, and people just started screaming and running.
Now, you know the area fairly well working down there. Is 9 o'clock in the morning the time when people have gathered in very large number? People get there early or get there later?
Yeah, I actually just happened. I usually get here a little after 9, and I happen to be here early for a meeting this morning. So, yeah, I mean, you see the general amount of traffic about 9 o'clock. Is that when it happened, right at 9?
No, just before and just after 9,
Okay.
in that there have been 2. Can you see outside at the moment as to anything that's happening?
I am outside.
And where are you and what are you seeing?
I am west of the 2 buildings, looking directly at them, and it's difficult to look at. I'll tell you that much.
This is not an area which is easy to reach for emergency services. These 2 buildings hug the Hudson River. There's only the West Side Drive that comes up there. Is there a large amount of emergency equipment descending on the place?
There sure is. As soon as I got out of the building, obviously the first thing you're surrounded by is siren noise everywhere, and you can hear it coming by now, even still.
Anything else you know that you'd like to add?
Just as I was coming out of the building, I heard somebody sort of ushering people away, and they were saying, you guys got to get out of here, it's a bomb.
Many thanks, Lindsey Grimm, who saw this occurring, at least the first, hesitate to call it an attack. The first incident, we'll continue to call it for now, and very much the second one now. That's what it looks like. Both of the towers in the Twin Trade Towers are now on fire. We have no idea whatsoever the measure of casualties inside or the measure of damage inside, though you can only imagine it. The New York City Office of Emergency Management said to us a short while ago they do not know what happened yet. I want to check in very quickly with the President of the United States, John Cochrane, who was with the President in Florida. John?
Peter, as you know, the President's down in Florida talking about education. He got up out of his hotel suite this morning, was about to leave. Reporters saw the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, whisper into his ear. Then reporters said to the President, do you know what's going on in New York? He said he did, and said he will have something to say about it later. His first event is about a half an hour at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida.
Thanks, John. John Cochrane with the President. President's in Florida today pushing his education reform. It will get wiped off the agenda today in view of this extraordinarily serious accident. For those of you who don't know, the Twin Trade Towers, and it's a popular destination for tourists when they come to New York City. It has financial offices in it. It has government offices. It has lots of access on the top above where this incident actually occurred, where tourists come. It's one of the great views in New York City, and people gather there, certainly at the foot of the building, fairly early in the morning, to be able to go and see it. The 2 collisions, the 2 incidents have occurred about 2/3 of the way up. John Miller, we haven't, we haven't had a aircraft fly into a building in New York, as far as I know, since just after the Second World War, when
the Empire State Building.
When it flew into the Empire State Building.
That's right. A B-52 flew into the Empire State Building then, and this is really the first time there's been anything like that since.
John, I was listening as you and Chris Isham, the head of our investigative unit, wandered up here to the rim just a short while ago to saying, one of you, I think, this was something they've been waiting to happen. Who are you talking about? What are you talking about?
What we were talking about is there's been a great frustration since the bombing of the World Trade Center, which the suspects later told federal authorities were intended to take the building down, that it didn't have a larger effect. And U.S. intelligence, FBI people for years have heard that they've always wanted to try and finish that job off, to take the buildings out, and that it was another viable target. Interestingly, ironically, whatever you want to call it, the World Trade Center just hired 2 weeks ago the head of the FBI's National Security Division for Counterterrorism in New York to augment and take over their security, pretty much aware of the level of threat that this is as a symbolic target.
One of the things that anybody mounting security in the World Trade Center himself will not be able to necessarily appreciate is what has happened at some distance. And there are a couple of reports, speculative at the moment, drifting around, including one on the Associated Press, which says the FBI is investigating reports of a plane hijacking just before the World Trade Center actually crashed. And John McWethy, our national security correspondent, is with us in Washington. John, what do you know?
Peter, we do hear that there was a hijacking. It is not clear where that hijacking occurred at this point, but it is one of the many things that U.S. officials are scrambling to try to get a handle on at this point.
Anything else, John? What happens at the Pentagon at a moment like this? I know everybody springs into action, but what do they do?
what happens is there is a particular counterterrorism cell within the Joint Chiefs of Staff that goes into an emergency basis at this point. They're investigating all aspects of air traffic in the area, all intelligence that, as they sift through it, may have given them some indication that something was happening. At this point, though, there were no warnings, they say, this morning. As they go back through this information, they may cull through it and find some clue, but at this point they believe there was no warning.
Thank you very much, John Wychwood. Please call us back as soon as you have something which would call into question immediately, of course, the notion of counterterrorism in an incident like this. Now, nobody who was watching television, watching Good Morning America today, for example, saw, at least those of us working on television, saw a first plane crash into the building. Much of the country watching television this morning will have seen the second plane crash into the other tower. And we have, as you can see from a distance there, until we get our cameras on the ground producing material which we can put on the air, a pretty limited view. So we have no idea what the evacuation procedure is in the building. We do know...
We're listening in the background. At this time, all elevators are out in both towers, according to the rescue workers on the scene. They put out an urgent call for Scott air packs because they're climbing smoke-filled stairwells. They've got to go very high up to get to the target locations, and they're talking about people trapped in the smoke there.
And this, of course, is reminiscent of 1993 when the explosions occurred at the trade towers last time.
Exactly.
John, is it standard operating procedure? You mentioned that all of the other principal government buildings in the city, Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence, and some of the other buildings will be evacuated. Is that a fairly standard anticipated operation?
It is an existing plan that is on paper, but Peter, I have to say, it's never been put into effect in New York. This is unprecedented, and I think as this develops, you'll see similar plans go into effect in Washington and potential target buildings, because they really have to take the position that they're under some form of attack here, at least as a precaution, until they sort this out.
As we wait to get a better grasp of what now becomes a rescue operation of the people in the Twin Trade Towers, we're reminded here that the U.S. officials, according to Pentagon sources, have no warnings today of any kind of terrorist attack. And if you listen to the news on a regular basis, you hear the Pentagon warning Americans worldwide of some impending terrorist attack. And here we are in the height of commercial America, with no warning whatsoever, no intelligence whatsoever, as far as we can tell, at least in these first couple of hours.
No, and all of the latest intelligence, at least the basics of which I've been scanning for months, have focused on the high potential for attacks against American targets abroad. Indeed, federal authorities and the intelligence community have reported they've interdicted and interrupted more than a dozen of those attacks by shutting terrorist cells down around the world. They've always been worried since the first attack on the World Trade Center that there would be another bold strike on U.S. soil.
And, of course, there are any number of targets which have been high on counterintelligence's list in New York City: the Lincoln Tunnel, the United Nations, the Holland Tunnel, the FBI headquarters, not to mention all of the city civic buildings which John mentions. President Bush is, by the way, going to speak very shortly to the nation about this, and then he's going to return to Washington. And we have on the phone our principal aviation analyst and expert, John Nance. Good morning, John.
Morning, Peter.
What would you like to contribute to this? Because one knows that it is indeed possible to fly an aircraft into a building if one intends to do so.
If one intends to do so, that's correct. And unfortunately, when you've got something that has been as worrisome a target as the World Trade Center, regardless of the way we've hardened it up on the ground, they have apparently, whoever they is, picked the one vulnerable area. The thing that is most disturbing to me is not only the fact, of course, that there are people more than likely in that building that have been directly affected by this, but that we may have an innocent load of passengers. The flash of that second aircraft across the screen is disturbingly close to what you would call the plan form of an Airbus A319 or an Airbus 320, also of a 767 or something of that nature. And that's a large airplane.
John, let me go slowly with you, and we'll actually put it on the screen again, very slowly, so that we can see it come across screen. Are you able to identify specifically the type of aircraft by looking at this videotape as it comes across? Can we roll that, please?
I'm watching that right as it comes across the screen, and it is more than likely not a Boeing 737. That profile, Peter, is very close to an Airbus A320, A319.
And who flies the Airbus 320, 318?
We have quite a few airlines.
Okay, so
very few private ones.
All right, and John comports a little bit here with at least these initial reports that the FBI is investigating reports of a hijacking just before the second crash occurred. We had no. John, let me just ask you one other technical question about just flying in the World Trade Centers. When the first incident occurred, it was reasonable for people to suspect that that was an accident.
Yes.
From a flying point of view, is the World Trade Center always something to worry about if you're taking off for one of New York City's airports?
Not really. And the fact that we have had all these years since that B-25 crashed into the Empire State Building tells you a lot about the flight paths around New York City. You have to be so disastrously out of contact and off course, and so many things would have to go wrong to imperil any of the buildings in Manhattan. The fact that it hasn't happened tells us really how rare a situation it would have to be.
John, the FAA immediately asked for New York City airports to suspend operations. We can confirm that Newark and LaGuardia have closed down.
And Kennedy and Teterboro and Westchester, they've essentially asked all airports within a 20-mile radius to put a hold on anything taken off.
Teterboro Airport, which is in New Jersey, just on the west side of the Hudson River, and Westchester, which is maybe 40, 50 miles north of New York City. They're all suspended operations. Standard, easy to do, John, quick to do? It seems to have been so.
Fortunately, very, very quick to do because they're all controlled by air traffic control towers, and they can put a halt to the operations with one phone call.
Okay, John Nance, thanks very much. Call us back, will you, if you learn anything.
Peter, one of the difficulties they're going to face, as you can glean from this picture here, is the people who are trapped and need to be rescued are on the upper floors, but you see the plume of smoke covers the roof. The last explosion was at the bottom of the building and the smoke rose up, but they were able to make a series of daring rescues by landing, and they've trained for this and retrained, landing police helicopters on the roofs of the Twin Towers and pulling people out. It's going to be very difficult, since the roofs are now enveloped in smoke, for the police helicopters, which are arriving at a landing zone now, just below the World Trade Center, to be able to get up there till that smoke dissipates. And that's where they had expected to pull a lot of people out this time because they had so much success the last time.
Similarly, John, if you look at the two buildings, it does appear that at least in the northern tower there, or the left tower as you see it on the screen, below the incident, the building at least looks on the outside to be reasonably secure, and people will have a long, horrendous, terrifying walk down in a darkened building, but will at least be able to get out on the ground. By the way, Claire Shipman, ABC's Claire Shipman just called in. She's been checking with the FBI. She also says that the FBI had no warning whatsoever. Their crisis management operation in Washington is in place in conjunction with the Federal Aviation Administration. They are all now, which makes perfect sense, focusing on the recovery of survivors. The New York Stock Exchange has delayed indefinitely its opening today. This will just have not only an extraordinary effect on the national psyche, one surmises, dissimilar perhaps, but from what happened in Oklahoma City, but a very clear reminder to those of us in the United States that terrorism of a huge magnitude, with which we're somewhat more accustomed in the Middle East and in Africa, given the attacks on the U.S. embassies a couple of summers ago. But a reminder again that as far as international terrorism is concerned, and people's anger and even desperation on this occasion with the United States is going to find itself manifest here